Have you ever felt a fatigue so profound it couldn't be explained by a simple lack of sleep? An emptiness, as if your very soul were being quietly drained? This is not the exhaustion of endless tasks, nor the stress of overwhelming circumstances. It's the subtle weight of giving too much of yourself, too often, and too freely, without awareness. This is a fatigue no amount of caffeine can touch. It is the kind that arises when your spiritual energy, your sacred life force, is depleted through constant emotional outpouring. Many don't realize it until they are nearly emptied. This isn't some abstract concept. It's a lived experience, a slow erosion of your clarity, your peace, and your presence. When you are constantly explaining yourself, always available, always absorbing the chaos of others, you're unknowingly leaking your essence into spaces that don't nurture you. And without realizing it, you become a ghost in your own life, not haunted, but haunting. A presence that exists but barely inhabits itself. We've been conditioned to believe that love means availability, that kindness requires sacrifice, and that being needed equates to being valued. But none of these beliefs are true. The reality is both simpler and more profound. Your energy is sacred, and it is under constant threat. Until you learn to guard it, everything you build, your peace, your power, your progress, will rest on shaky ground. And so, the real work begins. What drains you is not always the loudest. Often, it's the silent, subtle agreements made without thought, the automatic yes, the unanswered messages that demand your attention, the weight of emotional labor that goes unnoticed. You don't need a dramatic situation to feel spiritually depleted. Sometimes, it's the slow erosion of your presence that does the most damage. A favor here, compromise there, a smile you force when your soul is exhausted. Over time, these moments add up. Your energy doesn't vanish. It is spent bit by bit in exchanges you never consciously agreed to. Most people don't realize they are in a constant transaction, one where their attention, emotional bandwidth, and time are being withdrawn daily like currency. Requests come dressed in politeness or wrapped in expectation, but the cost remains the same. You begin to feel it when your peace shortens, when your thoughts race endlessly, when your body grows tired for no apparent reason. There's no receipt, but the price is real. The longer you ignore it, the more spiritually bankrupt you become. This erosion starts quietly. You answer messages when you don't have the emotional space for them. You stay in draining conversations just to keep the peace. You suppress your boundaries because you were taught that discomfort in others means fault in you. Gradually, the version of yourself that existed before all the compromises becomes harder to reach. Your truth, your stillness, your clarity don't disappear, but they get buried under layers of unspoken obligations. In those moments, you're not living, you're merely maintaining compliance. Even relationships that appear loving can carry hidden expectations that drain your energy without consent. When someone values your reactions more than your essence, your usefulness more than your soul, the dynamic becomes parasitic. You start to perform out of habit. You say yes even when every part of you screams no. And the deeper tragedy is this: the people closest to you may never even notice the cost, because they've only ever seen the version of you that gives without question. But the moment you recognize this imbalance, the spell begins to break. You start to see where your energy is being drained, who is pulling from you, and how much of your life has been spent trying to sustain what was never meant to be sustained. From here, awareness becomes your first boundary. Your presence is no longer automatic, and your silence is no longer permission. What was once unconscious becomes intentional. And in this shift, the invisible transaction loses its power. You are no longer a resource to be accessed. You are a soul reclaiming its center. Once you see the cost of these invisible exchanges, something inside you changes. A quiet resolve begins to form, not out of anger, but out of recognition. You understand that giving endlessly doesn't make you more lovable. It only makes you more invisible. And so you begin to pull back, not to harm anyone, but to find yourself again beneath the noise of other people's needs. In that withdrawal, something remarkable begins to happen. The dynamic shifts. Your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. When you stop showing up on command, those who relied on your compliance are forced to confront the space where your energy once was. Some may become restless, others may be confused, but you begin to breathe again. Pulling back doesn't mean you no longer care. It means you've chosen to care for yourself first. That shift isn't cold, it's sacred. Your energy is no longer available on demand. In its place, your clarity begins to take root. The silence you once feared becomes the very thing that rebuilds your strength. Energy that was once constantly flowing outward begins to turn inward. Your nervous system, once stretched thin by constant responsiveness, find a new rhythm. In that stillness, you start to notice what you were too busy to feel. Your own desires, your own intuition, your own exhaustion. Pulling back grants you access to the parts of yourself that were lost in performance. It's not an escape, it's a return. You begin to realize that peace is not the absence of chaos, but the presence of boundaries. And within that presence, your identity stabilizes. You are no longer just reacting to life. You are choosing how to live it. The power of pulling back isn't about punishing others. It's about the alignment it restores within yourself. Those who valued your utility may resist this change. Let them. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Every time you choose to pause and withhold your energy from what drains you, you affirm something much deeper. Your soul is not here to be consumed. It is here to be honored. The alignment that starts in stillness soon demands protection. Once your energy is no longer leaking into the expectations of others, a new challenge arises, holding that energy steady. It's easy to reclaim your peace in solitude, but true transformation begins when you re-enter the world and resist the urge to give it away again. That resistance is not about building walls. It's about practicing emotional discipline. It's about choosing when, where, and how your energy flows. Because clarity without consistency is fragile, and peace without boundaries is temporary. Emotional discipline is not cold or distant. It is presence with intention. The kind of presence that listens without absorbing, sees without reacting, and feels without becoming consumed. Each time you are triggered but choose not to respond out of impulse, you strengthen the container of your spirit. You begin to understand that reaction is not strength, it's surrender. Surrendering your energy to whatever or whoever disturbs your center. Discipline becomes your shield, not against life, but against your own habits of self-abandonment. You don't owe a reply to every comment. You don't have to defend yourself just because someone misunderstood you. When your nervous system screams to speak, to explain, to fight back, you pause. In that pause, you reclaim your power of choice. You are no longer reacting from reflex, driven by unresolved emotions from your past. You stand in the present, aware of the cost of giving yourself away to battles that only seek your reaction, not your truth. Emotional discipline is saying, not everything gets to have me. It's also recognizing that not every provocation is personal. Some people project their chaos onto you because they don't know how to hold it themselves. Some conversations aren't dialogues. They are traps designed to provoke, not understand. Protecting your energy means knowing when your presence will be fruitful and when it will be consumed. It means walking away from dynamics that thrive on your frustration. Choosing silence, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough not to waste your fire. And in that choice, a deeper power arises. You no longer need to win arguments to feel seen. You no longer need to explain your worth to be valid. Your energy becomes yours again, not just in theory, but in practice. Emotional discipline teaches you to invest your energy where it will grow, not where it will be extracted. Every time you withhold your reaction, every time you stay grounded instead of triggered, you're not just protecting your peace. You're building a life where your spirit leads, not your wounds. Practicing emotional discipline inevitably brings you face to face with the roles you've been performing. As you choose stillness over reaction, space over overextension, what emerges is not just peace. It's the realization of how long you've been playing parts to stay accepted. It becomes clear that the pressure to please didn't begin yesterday. It started years ago, perhaps even in childhood, when being helpful, agreeable, or emotionally in tune became a way to stay safe, to be liked, to feel needed. And over time, these behaviors solidified into identity. The mask you wear, whether it's the reliable one, the strong one, or the selfless one, wasn't born out of deceit. It was born out of necessity. When your authenticity felt too much, when your needs were dismissed, and when your truth caused discomfort, you adapted. You became what others celebrated: available, dependable, emotionally fluent. But somewhere in that adaptation, you began to shrink, not in body, but in essence. The soul, when repeatedly neglected, learns to hide behind function, and what was once a survival tool becomes a cage. This performance isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's as subtle as laughing at jokes that bruise you, agreeing to plans that drain you, answering calls you dread. You tell yourself it's kindness, but deep down it's fear. The fear of what will happen if you stop performing. Will they leave? Will they still care? Will you still matter? That's the erosion. It happens when you start confusing being needed with being loved. When you offer your energy not as a gift, but as a condition for connection, eventually that way of living becomes unsustainable. Your spirit becomes heavy under the weight of your own silence. The persona you've built begins to crack, not because you're failing, but because your true self is tired of waiting. Fatigue sets in, not just physically, but emotionally and existentially. You're surrounded by people, but you feel unseen. You show up to spaces where everyone knows your role, but no one knows your heart. And that's when the deepest kind of loneliness begins, the kind that comes from being constantly visible, yet profoundly unknown. This kind of erosion doesn't scream. It whispers. It shows up as restlessness, that sense that no matter how much you give, it's never enough. It manifests as burnout, disguised as responsibility, and resentment masked as generosity. You begin to ask yourself, who am I when I'm not performing? What remains when I stop earning my place in the lives of others? Though these questions can be terrifying, they are the gateway to liberation. Because once you start asking, the mask begins to loosen its grip. You realize you don't have to be everything to everyone. You only need to be honest with yourself. Reclaiming your spiritual energy requires more than boundaries. It demands truth, a truth that says, I'm not here to be convenient. I am not here to hold roles that shrink me. I am not here to perform palatable versions of myself to maintain harmony. You were never meant to disappear into your usefulness. You are meant to be seen, felt, and known in your entirety, even if that means being misunderstood, even if it means being alone for a while. Because the self that emerges when the mask falls is not just authentic, it is whole. And wholeness is what your soul has longed for all along. As the mask begins to slip away and your true self starts to emerge, everything around you begins to shift. People who once found comfort in you may feel confused. Those who praised your constant availability may question your silence. But this disorientation isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's confirmation that your frequency has changed. You're no longer broadcasting the signal of someone who performs to belong. You're now emitting a resonance rooted in honesty. And this signal acts as a filter. What doesn't align simply falls away. not because you pushed it, but because your energy no longer permits its presence. This shift is subtle, but undeniable. Conversations that once felt natural begin to feel hollow. Relationships built on your utility begin to wither as you stop overextending. You begin to see how often you've contorted yourself to avoid discomfort. How many times you've dimmed your truth to maintain the illusion of closeness. But illusions only thrive when the light is dim. As your clarity strengthens, it illuminates the shadows, both yours and theirs. And in that light, it becomes impossible to sustain what was only ever maintained through self-erasure. What emerges in place of the old is not a louder version of you, but a more precise one. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry weight. You give less, but with more intention. You no longer seek approval because your worth is no longer outsourced. This new identity doesn't need to be understood to feel valid. It doesn't chase, beg, or explain. It simply stands quietly, unapologetically in alignment. And from that stance, you begin to attract differently. Not people who need your performance, but people who respect your presence. You also realize that solitude is not something to be survived. It is something sacred. In the quiet, your energy recalibrates. The chaos clears. Your nervous system heals. You stop listening to the echoes of who others thought you were and begin tuning into the clarity of who you've always been. That identity, rooted in resonance and guided by peace, isn't something you construct. It's something you uncover once all the noise is gone. In that space, you meet yourself, not as a role or a reaction, but as the one who has always been waiting beneath the mask, whole, undiluted, and finally free to lead your own life. As your true self takes the lead, the desire for solitude no longer feels like avoidance. It becomes necessity. After shedding roles, shifting frequencies, and stepping into alignment, sacred isolation offers what no external connection ever can: restoration. It's the sanctuary where noise fades and the nervous system can finally exhale. In this space, you no longer shapeshift to belong. You no longer filter your voice to maintain peace. You begin to inhabit yourself fully, not as a reaction to others, but as a rhythm you've returned to. The stillness is not emptiness. It is clarity reintroduced. In sacred isolation, you begin to understand how much of your life was lived in response, not from choice, but from habit. You begin to feel the pull of your own intuition again, gentle yet insistent, reminding you of what you truly need. You rest without guilt. You disconnect without explanation. And in this process, you discover that your energy is most powerful when it isn't being constantly negotiated. Here, you stop performing worth and begin embodying it. No validation required, no audience necessary, only presence and the quiet, steady rebuilding of your inner field. Through this reset, you don't just recover energy, you refine it. You begin to notice the subtle patterns that once drained you. The urgency to respond, the guilt after saying no, the fatigue from overextending. All of it becomes visible in the silence. Sacred isolation offers distance, not from life, but from the illusions that once distorted it. And with that distance, you return stronger, not harder, but clearer. You no longer need to announce this change. You simply carry it. The world feels different because you're no longer moving through it fragmented. You are whole, and your energy, once scattered, is now gathered, ready to be used, not wasted. From a clarity that sacred isolation brings, a natural shedding begins. You no longer feel the need to cling to what once validated your existence. Letting go stops being a struggle and becomes a quiet decision, an unspoken agreement with your soul to stop carrying what was never meant to be yours. Rebirth doesn't always arrive with thunder or fireworks. Often, it comes as a quiet sigh, a subtle release, a moment when you finally whisper, "I don't want to do this anymore," and mean it. That's where the new self begins, not in ambition, but in surrender. Letting go of people, patterns, and identities that once kept you safe feels like grief, and in many ways it is. You mourn the version of yourself who tolerated discomfort for the sake of belonging, who confused chaos with closeness, who worked tirelessly to be seen without ever truly being known. But beneath that grief, there is spaciousness. What once felt like loss now reveals itself as freedom. Your nervous system settles into a new baseline. No longer do you wake up bracing for the day. The overthinking softens, and in its place rises a quiet confidence, calm, grounded, deeply sovereign. This rebirth is not a performance. It is a frequency. You stop seeking yourself in others and start bringing your full self wherever you go. No longer shaped by the need for approval or the grip of fear, you become rooted in your own resonance. You attract what aligns with your energy, not by chasing it, but by simply being. What falls away does so because it no longer has permission to feed off your energy. In its place grows something sacred, a life designed not for survival, but for truth. A life where your spirit leads, not hidden, not compromised, but whole and awake. Your spiritual energy is not infinite. It must be guarded, not just from others, but from the habits that quietly drain it. Protection isn't selfish, it's sacred. Every boundary you set, every silence you hold, every decision you make in favor of your peace is a prayer for your own return. And when you return to yourself fully, you no longer fear losing what was never aligned. You stand clear, calm, whole, finally free to live a life powered by presence, not performance.